yourself to the group,
Yeah.
to the audience.
Hi, everyone. So I am a former teacher. I taught high school English. I have a lot of children. I have a first grader, a third grader, a sixth grader, and then my fiance's daughters are in 8th grade and 11th grade. So we are seeing a lot of what's going on in our household right now. I also write about education and about parenting for a living. So this topic was obviously super important to me personally and for everyone in the country right now.
You're such a superhero, Gail. Every time you mention the kids, I'm like, my goodness, I think I'm doing something with just 2 kids, 2 teenagers, but you're blowing it out the pocket, blowing it out the field. I'm so proud of you.
You know, if you ask my kids, they might have some suggestions, some room for improvement, but we are getting through each day the best we can right now.
That's right. Thanks, Gail. What's up, Phyllis? Tell us about yourself.
So first, it's so nice to actually put a face to the name. I've just been interacting with both of you for a while now, so it's really nice to actually see your faces. I'm zooming in or beaming in from the school where I'm a school counselor. It's a K-8, so I am hoping there are no overhead announcements during this discussion. I'm also a therapist. I work with kids and families in private practice, and I'm a journalist and the author of the book Middle School Matters, and I'm also a parent. So I have 3 kids. Gail, you have me beat there. That's a lot of kids in your house. And I have a 7th grader, and then I have a senior in high school and a first-year college student.
Awesome. Phyllis, you and I are going to have to talk offline too, because my daughter's going to college next year and I don't think I'm ready. I'm like, wait a minute, this is happening too fast. What happened to you in training pants?
So true.
So Gail, what made you want to write about this particular topic? You know, I know how I got introduced to the topic, and when I got introduced to it by Jess, I was like, amazing. Yes, I definitely have things that I want to say, things that I want to add, but I thought it was amazing that you started this conversation, you started this topic. So tell us about what you what sparked that for you and what you wanted the outcome to be.
Yeah, I mean, definitely talking to tweens and teens and seeing, it's almost like it's really a lose-lose proposition for them right now, right? Like they can decide to ignore the rules and go to parties, and as much as they may say otherwise, a lot of them feel guilty, they feel conflicted, each of them has sort of a different personal comfort level. So, you know, you're out with 2 friends, which is now allowed in San Francisco, you know, but one takes their mask off or 2 take their mask off, or they say, oh, let's take off our mask just for the picture. And you know, it's so hard on them to have a lack of clarity, to have rules that feel like you can't comply with them. So for a while, as we said in the piece here in San Francisco, they weren't allowed to see even a single friend outside and in masks. And then to feel like, okay, well, complying with this, and I don't feel that guilt of, you know, I might be endangering people's grandparents, I might be endangering people's parents, but then it's, you know, you see the life kind of drain out of them, because at this age, social interactions are not just something that's pleasant for them. They're absolutely essential. I mean, they are for all human beings, but especially for our adolescents. So I think just watching that and seeing what a sticky position we had been putting them in is what got me going. And also, you know, I looked at the rules and I felt, and all the coverage, reading articles, and it's about kids, little kids, and it's about adults. And it just seems like we weren't doing enough talking about teens and tweens. We just kind of assume they'll be fine. And we're focused on the childcare that lets us work, or we're focused on, oh gosh, the kids who need to learn to read. So it seemed like there just needed to be a bit more of a focus on these kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And Phyllis, what made you want to join in, to collaborate?
You know, when Gail contacted me, I was actually living this in real time. I had a freshman in college, and while he was in person, all of his classes were virtual, and it seemed like every week more kids were getting sent home. And there was a lot of mystery around how many were being sent home and what the infractions were. And that was contributing to his stress, contributing to the stress of all of the parents who had just sent their kids off to school. Because on the one hand, we wanted to make sure our kids weren't isolated, that they weren't lonely. For many of them, this was their first time being away from caregivers. And yet we didn't want them to get kicked out. We didn't want them to get in trouble with the police or to get sick. And so trying to figure out what the right thing to do was as a parent, seeing the administrators struggle with what the right thing to do was. And for me personally, really struggling with where the line was. How many rules was I comfortable with my child breaking in order to make sure that he sustained his mental health? Not that he necessarily would tell me every rule that he was breaking, but just in terms of how I would guide him. And I came to the conclusion by the end of that first quarter that the rules were not sustainable. And when you have enough kids, good kids, smart, reasonable, rational kids who care about other people, breaking these rules, you have to start asking, is it a problem with the kid or is the problem with the policy? And, we talk in the article about how abstinence only doesn't work when it comes to sex. And I think it's very similar to what is happening with colleges right now. And so we have to figure out how we can best balance public health with kids' very real developmental needs, especially at a time when we know that 1 in 4 kids are struggling with mental health problems between the ages of 18 and 24 in particular, but all kids. I see it in my K-8 school as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I came into the article because I had the opportunity, I was introduced, right? Like Gail and I got on a phone call and she was like, hey, I think that you may have a perspective that adds into what Phyllis and I want to talk about, and we'd love for you to collaborate with us on that. And I was like, absolutely, 100%. Like, let's do it. And for me, it was important because much like you all, I'm living in a house with teenagers, right? My son is 13, my daughter is 16. He's in 8th grade, and he was having all these anticipatory experiences around like their 8th grade dance, and he's going to my daughter's school now, so he was excited about being back in the same school building with his sister, and like the whole locker situation and all of these things, and getting back in alignment with his friends that he had once gone to elementary school with, because he took a little break we had him switched out at different schools for a little bit. And then she was excited because it's her junior year, right? So we're looking at homecoming. She's a student athlete. So this is the time where she's supposed to be applying and getting all her videos ready for submission to the recruiters and the coaches. And so there's like all of these things that they were looking forward to that I think at the beginning of 2020, they knew that there was a possibility they wouldn't be able to do it, but it didn't make sense to them because they're still adolescents, right? And then we come into this new school year, and they're so limited in the things that they can do and the experiences that they have. And there's no space to really allow them to process their grief, because it's true live grief that they're experiencing. It's not necessarily the grief and the loss of a loved one, but it's a loss of their dreams, a loss of their hopes, a loss of the things that they have been looking forward to, a loss of some of their motivation as well. So I just realized that we probably didn't give all the context. We're talking as if everybody has read the article, but the article was really about teenagers in the pandemic and how the intersection between teenagers and politics are not necessarily paying attention to the mental health needs of these teenagers and their neurological functioning, their emotional functioning, and how a lot of these laws and politics are centered, like Gail said, centered on young children and centered on adults, but missing that piece around what adolescents need, especially because their brain is so different, right? Like their frontal lobe isn't fully developed, but they want a greater sense of autonomy. And they need a greater sense of autonomy because they're in just months for some and short years for others, they're about to be adults, and what that means for them in terms of their emotional development, their mental health and development, their social development and social skills, and all of the things that are connected to that, and how the stay-at-home orders are really inhibiting them from growing in the way that biology is requiring them to grow. And how our politicians are not paying attention to that very specific subgroup of citizens who, again, just in a few months or a few years, are going to be adults leading us in different ways. So did I summarize that well, ladies, or was there something else I needed to put in there?
Absolutely.
Okay,
that's perfect.
So my question to you all is, because we talked about the article being in print, there were some things that maybe we didn't get a chance to cover. So let's start with you, Gail. What are some things that you wish we would have been able to cover in the article, but just didn't have a chance to?
I'll lead with two. One of them is that some of the criticism we got from the article was that we didn't do a good enough job of setting it up. Obviously, we need some restrictions, right? Obviously, people are dying. These deaths are tragic. We are not here arguing that teens should just be out and living their normal lives. Like that's absolutely not at all what we said. All three of us, are doing our best to wrap our heads around the enormity of lost 400,000 lives, brothers, grandmothers, sons. We kind of thought that went without saying, but apparently it didn't. And like you said, there's only so many words. The other piece that we really tried hard to get in there and didn't make it is, I think race is a really important issue here. I think when you have a set of rules, everything in our history says they will be disproportionately, any enforcement efforts will be disproportionately applied to people of color and to teenagers of color. So when you have the rules on the books, it might be, that a parent like me or Phyllis might say, okay, well, you've got your one person, and so it's okay to go see your one person and you can drive there. Whereas, if police officers, if I know that police officers are doing random checks, as they do when there's a really strict stay-at-home order, if I'm a parent of color, I'm not going to allow that exception. I'm not going to put my kid in that position of getting pulled over and having to deal with that. And then you have a real unfairness because, you have some kids who are getting an exception, who are getting what they need in terms of mental health, in terms of interaction with their peers, and some who aren't. So that was a piece I was upset that we weren't able to get into the final product.
Yeah, and that was super upsetting and frustrating for me as well. Amongst the three of us, I am that parent of color, right? And I am raising these kids who are suffering and dealing with the things the same way that your children are dealing with them. And it's true, Gail, that I do have to be a lot more conscious around what rules they can break and when they can break them and what consequences are going to be in place and what resources do we have to address those consequences, right? Which then brings us into that intersection of social economic status, because you're then talking about race and you're talking about finances and you're talking about how you deal with all of these things. I think in the article, we mentioned that some folks are able to still get that interaction that they need because maybe they have private tutoring or maybe they're part of team sports that are still meeting in person. But those team sports are a little bit more expensive, especially right now because they have to pay the coaches a little bit more because of hazard. They have to buy additional types of equipment so everybody can play and be safe. And that cost comes back on the parents. And so for some folks who are, aside from race, and we could get back into that, we're also talking about the social economic implications, and that if a parent, despite the race, doesn't have the money, their children are really not going to have any social interaction because they can't pay for the private tutoring. They're not going to be able to pay for the additional costs of sports. They're working more jobs because we're losing more jobs, right? So they have to work even more in order to just keep the job and maintain the job that they have as well. But I do think that race part is so important because in our country, we still like to be colorblind, right? In our country, we still like to think that we could put out policies and it affects everybody equally, but it doesn't. And I think that 2020 with the highlight of social media showed just how unjust the system is, the criminal justice system is when it comes to people of color. And even though a parent's intentions are so pure in just wanting their children to be with their friends, the child is the one who will end up suffering the consequences for that in the event that they get arrested or they get pulled over or whatever the case may be. So I just wanted to add on to that. Thank you for bringing that up, Gail. What is something, Phyllis, that you wish we would have been able to cover in the article, but it didn't quite hit the print?
I'm listening to both of you and I couldn't agree more. I know it was disappointing that nuance didn't make it into the article, but I'm seeing it transfer into other scenarios. So, you have in the college setting, you have some kids who come from higher SES backgrounds and who are really comfortable engaging with kids from, all over the place. And then you have some kids who are from really rural areas or who are for the first time engaging with kids who might be from someplace different and who are as a result more isolated or having an even harder time connecting. So policies that don't give these or inorganic or structured experiences for kids and give them that assist. It could be anything from ice skating to campfire, but for the kids who don't have that ease engaging with other kids, particularly once they've left home, it can be even more challenging when we have really, really strict policies in place and no one's giving them that assist. So that's another way it shows up. And then in the school setting with schools closed, even on the basic level of school closures, you have some kids who have more mobility. So we live in an area where we didn't have as strict closures as in San Francisco, but that doesn't mean that kids were not isolated in different ways as a result of socioeconomics or race, because they were living in a community where it would put family members at risk. So among my own students, I have some a much greater proportion of students of color are simulcasting in by choice, even though they could come in person, for a couple reasons. One, it might relate to just the length of the commute or the parents' flexibility to take them for half a day. If you're working 2 jobs or even 1 job full-time and you can't just pick up your kid at noon, it's going to make it more challenging. And on top of all of that, they might have health relatives or people in their family who the child would be putting at risk. And you can see my students of color, by and large, are carrying more stress and responsibility when they do come. They're really anxious and worrying that they're going to be responsible for making a family member or a grandparent sick.
Yeah. And Phyllis, it's interesting that you brought up those factors of why parents may not be bringing their children to school. I think when I'm talking to some of my friends, the other factor that we consider in terms of taking our children to school is the healthcare system and the response to us as Black people, our brown people, in that we already have our hesitations and fears related to that because of the experiments that have been done on Black and brown people in our country. But then in addition to that, currently right now, we recognize that we're not treated equally even in the healthcare system, where you're having, I don't know if you guys saw the physician, I think she was in Chicago, a middle-aged Black woman who ended up getting COVID and went to her hospital that she was working at and told them about all these symptoms and still wasn't treated fairly. Ended up going to another hospital, wasn't treated fairly, but that's also where she passed away. And so our voice is still not even elevated in our healthcare system. So if I send my child to school and my child happens to contract COVID, then I want to take them to the doctor in order to get treated, another risk that they're not going to be taken seriously, that we as a family aren't going to be taken seriously. So unfortunately, we have to, as Black and brown folks, we have to think about the consequences, the long-term consequences, far more than the benefit of the day. The benefit is that we want our children to have the social interaction that they need because it's important, but the consequences in so many different areas are so grand that we don't know if it's worth it, right? And like all parents, not just Black or brown parents, we do the best that we can and recognize that even when opportunities are presented, we have to think more about consequences, because sometimes our politicians aren't thinking about those consequences for us, and they're not changing the systems in the ways that they need to have them changed. If we go a little bit deeper into the social economic status, what are some things that you think that we should be asking our politicians to kind of address when we're looking at the intersection of COVID and SES for adolescents?
In the school setting, I think we need to be in this. We did bring this up a little bit in the article in terms of allocating more funding for mental health services for kids and more sidewalk consultations, more teen on-teen mentoring programs, more money for and maybe even awareness for kids to know how to seek help, get help, particularly if they're not at school. But we also need to be providing tutoring and other forms of support to students who may not have the best Wi-Fi, or who may, that homework gap is so real that kids are not able to even access the content, even if they want to, and so finding ways to address that homework gap and to help kids who are disproportionately impacted by the school closures.
Yeah. Before Gail, you answer, my kids were making fun of me because I'm dressed for COVID interviews, right? Which means like dressed professionally on the top and a little bit more relaxed on the bottom. So they were teasing me like, "Mom, what are you about to go do?" And I was like, "I'm about to go talk with Gail and Phyllis on a live. We're talking about teens in COVID. What is something that you want me to highlight?" And my son said, "Tell them that we don't like homework and we don't like online learning."
Fair.
I said, "I know, baby, but do you have any solutions?" He was like, "Nah, tell him to just stop it." So it's funny that you brought that up, because I think sometimes my kids want the Wi-Fi to stop working, because then maybe they have an excuse to not do their assignments. Gail, go ahead. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that reminds me of my third grader yesterday. I was talking to him and saying, what is it that you really miss the most about school? And he said, being there. So that's helpful. I think when it comes to what we need policymakers to know, I think there's sort of two levels here. One is I really want them to understand the importance for teens, because I think our tendency is to sort of think that things are impacting everyone the same way they're impacting us. So I think for adults, we're kind of like, oh, this is a bummer, but we're inside and, oh gosh, we don't get to get our nails done or whatever it is. Like, we have the ways that this is impacting us. And then we kind of project those onto teens as well. And I think what a lot of policymakers miss is that there's kind of three levels of disappointment going on here, or disadvantage going on here. And one is like we said, they need those social interactions to build resilience, to learn lessons. I mean, think as adolescents ourselves, when you say the wrong thing to a friend, what's the lesson you learn? Like, there's just, I think we said in our article, there's like 1,000 little interactions that they learn from all the time, every day, every week at school. And then I think there's this other level that you were talking about, Dr. Plummer, about the analogy I would draw is almost like when you have a miscarriage. It's not that you've lost anything that you had, but you've lost your expectation for the future. You've lost your vision of what your junior year was going to be like, what your senior year was going to be like. And I think that, like, mentally, emotionally, that's a huge loss for kids. And I think it's a loss that's bigger for them than it is for us. I think when we lose our future plans, it's like, okay, we had to cancel that vacation, but we have more perspective. We know there will be many more vacations. They to a certain extent, they don't have the perspective, and to a certain extent, they're completely rational. They won't have another senior year. They only get one senior year, right? Mm-hmm. And then I think there's even a third level, which Phyllis was really good about bringing up, and that made it into the piece, which is the FOMO, right? So if you're telling your kid, you can't be out there, and then we sort of said, it's not even fear of missing out. It's actually missing out. Like, they're right. They are missing out, because there are some of their peers are connecting, right? And then they're sitting at home, and because of social media, they're seeing it. It's not like people are getting together and they don't know about it. They're actually seeing their classmates getting together and engaging in ways that they're not able to join. And I think that the sadness over missing out is completely rational. I think those connections are important. We have research showing that those connections are important academically. That the more friends you have in an AP class, the better you're likely to do in an AP class. So I think for policymakers to just sit with that and understand, like, the magnitude of the loss for these kids and the layers of loss for these kids is important. And then the second thing I'll say on socioeconomic stuff is, when the San Francisco order came out and it said that these private programs could continue. So, if you're already engaged in like a soccer league, or you went to an art studio for classes, or, you did one of these paid opportunities, for those to be able to continue. And I understand their thinking is they have the structures to make those safe, because they're able to implement these controls for businesses that they can't just for parent organized or for kid organized activities. But my ask of them would be, come up with something for the other kids. Either throw city budget at it and subsidize spots at these privates, like classes for other kids, or beef up your park and rec department so that there's offerings for kids. But I just would like to see, and as Phyllis mentioned, tutoring would be amazing. There's an exception in the order for private tutors to come to homes and work with children. If we're trying to take socioeconomic differences into consideration, we would create a public tutoring program. I would love to see the city, if they think that's safe for one individual in a mask to come to someone's home, let's send tutors to people's homes, and let's pay for it out of the city budget.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Phyllis.
Sorry. I know that our local school system in Montgomery County, which is where I live, has instituted a 24/7 homework hotline or tutoring hotline, but it's not the same as meeting face to face, and kids to feel it really does go back to that sense of belonging that Gail mentioned, that sense of connection. It's why I work so hard to get kids to build up the courage to turn their cameras on if that's getting in their way. Because if your teachers can't assess your understanding, and if you can't feel like other people are responding in real time to your facial expressions, it's one of the few times kids don't have to wear a mask now, then you're not going to engage with the material either in the same way. So anything we can do to get that one-on-one help, I think, is important. And going back to what Gail said about FOMO, or just Mo, kids are also experiencing a lot of jealousy, more jealousy than I've seen ever in my years as a school counselor, over things that you would not even necessarily think about, or certainly wouldn't think about in prior years. It could be that somebody else has a sibling. It could be that somebody has a trampoline, so they have something they can do outside, or a fire pit, or an outside lamp, so that it's easier to get together with friends. It could be that somebody is the person who always organizes the Netflix parties, but kids are really struggling. And I think a lot of that has to do with trying to get some semblance of control over some part of their life when they feel like they have no control over any part of their life whatsoever. And I do want to point out on the socioeconomic side as well, I see it impacting teachers differently too, and the educators. I was a little embarrassed that this never occurred to me before, but I was talking to a teacher recently, and I was asking her how she felt and how she was doing, just checking in, particularly since we, a few weeks ago, let go of the virtual Wednesday, so we're now in person 5 days a week. And I had been a little bit concerned about the stamina of the educators, ramping up, because it's just a lot to be doing the hybrid program. But what I hadn't thought about was how she answered. And she said, well, and this is actually a woman of color too, she said, I don't feel comfortable taking public transportation. So it's winter, it's cold here. And so she's biking to work 5 days a week in winter. So it's impacting her in that way as well. She doesn't have a car, and she's unlikely to get a car. And so I think we have to realize that our students are only going to do as well as their teachers are doing, or their parents are doing as well. And so when we think about policies and when we think about the socioeconomics of all of this, we have to be thinking beyond the kids and what is going on in their homes and what is going on with their teachers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. I know that example was about how our teachers are affected and suffering as well, but I truly applaud that teacher, right? Like, to bike to work in the winter, and it's cold here on the East Coast, right? It's been cold and windy lately.
She's amazing. She's an amazing teacher.
Please tell her we said thank you for what she's doing there too. There's been so much research around how the social economic divide continues to happen and how it's rooted in academics and the academic divide as well, right? So many of the things that you all brought up to the audience rather, made me think about how this is going to continue to create that divide, that unless our policymakers are paying attention to that intersection again of COVID and social economic status, specifically with teens, it's going to continue to cause more issues, because whether it's slower Wi-Fi, or whether it's a lack of development of social skills, or whether it's a more impacted, negatively impacted mental health, like jealousy, if we don't hurry up and remedy it, it's going to cause these students to continue to feel disconnected, and not just feel disconnected, but to be disconnected from their peers that have different social economic status levels and access. I was talking with my daughter the other day. She's the 16-year-old, and she has her, my goodness, I'm so grateful she's not on Facebook, because she would be mortified to know that I'm talking about her right now. But she has her guy that she's been dating, and we have Valentine's Day coming up. So I said to her, hey, she said, what are you and Megs, that's my wife, what are you and Megs doing for Valentine's Day? And I was like, oh, we'll probably, find some little place. DC has 25% open capacity. Like, we could find a couple places here and there. And I said, well, what are you guys going to do? And she was like, Mom, like, what kind of options do I actually have? Like, I don't have options, right? Like, we can't, what are we going to do? And so then it allowed me and his mom to kind of think creatively about how we can allow them to have a nice experience. But even in having that nice experience, it means that we have to have greater access. It means that we have to have different resources. It means that we have to be paying attention to what they're going through. And for us to be able to pay attention to what they're going through means that we're not stressed about something else over here, right? And so there's all these factors that we're truly not thinking about. And even as parents who are in the midst of it with the children, there's still some things that we miss here or there. And so I really do hope that those people who are in the audience and listening go back and talk to your teenagers about what they're experiencing right now, and coming together with your friends or coming together with different professionals and kind of seeking where we can make some solutions, because we want the policymakers to make some changes soon, but there's probably power in what we can do individually as well. If one family does have a fire pit, then maybe we can take a couple kids over there, right? Or if one family does have a trampoline, then maybe we could figure out how to get those kids over there. If there is a Netflix party, maybe 2 kids are at one house and 3 kids are at another, and they're watching Netflix in these smaller groups. Like, we could think creatively about around what this means. One of the other things we talked about is how we maybe have greater sense of resilience because we're adults, right? As adults, we've experienced a lot. I'm very comfortable aging myself. I'm 40 years old. So I have 40 years of experience that has taught me, there, as much as there is a low, there is going to be a high, right? Yeah. Our children, however, haven't had that many years of experience. And so they don't always understand that there's going to be a high. There's going to be something that we could come out of this. Phyllis, did you have something you wanted to add in that part?
I'm just listening. That resonates for me so much. Some of that's come up a lot in the school setting. I feel like in some ways, actually, kids are starting to fall apart more now. And my theory is that with the change in the local politics and with the vaccine on the horizon, kids have let down their guard just enough that they're allowing themselves to feel all that they've lost. And I'm actually seeing that boredom turn into depression, that anxiety that used to exist kind of morphing into this almost chronic state of anxiety, this like hypervigilance. And so I've been brainstorming with my students, what can we do as a school to help you right now when things are so hard? And what's coming through loud and clear for me, and what I've been talking about with my administration, is that they're looking for fun and novelty. They're looking for anything to break up the monotony of their days. It could be just, I was joking that we should all make, with the students, COVID piñatas, and then get a bat and whack the crap out of it, outside. And, you've got the catharsis and you've got candy. I mean, what more could you possibly want? My head of school said, I'm going to have to think about the beeping angle. And since I am in DC, kids are really tuned into politics and really thinking about that. And they're carrying that stress. Even today, I had a student, a 3rd grader, come in, and he was standing at my door. I said, do you want to come in? What's going on? And he said, there's so much what did he say? The world is so unstabilized. And so all of these people are going to become dictators. And do you know what a dictator is? A dictator is somebody who deletes all the rules and gets power that they don't earn. And, he was really turning over all of these kind of big concepts with me. And I'm not sure previous generations have done that in the same way. I feel like they're carrying the weight of the world, and they just want to be kids. They just want to horse around and have some fun. And we, as adults and even policymakers, can be looking for any way that we can inject a little bit of levity, a little bit of fun into their lives in safe ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think those are such great points and relate to what I was going to say is, I when I taught English in PG County, actually, one of my biggest tricks was the kids are kids, you know. I mean, it was ninth grade, so it was 14-year-olds, but people just addressed them as adults, and I think they deserve the respect of adults. But at the same time, you know, the lightness and the fun that we use in elementary school went over really, really well with them. And there are some lessons, social emotional lessons, that it's possible to get all the way through your teen years and not have learned, or you just need them repeated for that sense of reassurance and that sense of, you know, everything's going to be okay. And I think sometimes we go a little over the top with telling our kids about what's going on in the world. And obviously we want them to know, but sometimes we can forget to say, it's going to be okay. You know, the grown-ups have this isn't on you. And one of the things that I've been using is the weather analogy. I think is really helpful for kids, where you say, you know, emotions are like the weather, where, you know, just because today is rainy, or even it's been raining for a week, doesn't mean it's always going to be rainy. The sun will come out. You will feel happy again. Because I think when we look at our rates of suicidal ideation, and even suicide, if anyone saw the fabulous piece by Erica Green that was in the New York Times, looking at the suicide rate among teens in Las Vegas and Clark County, Nevada. I think that feeling of like, if it's raining now, it's always going to be raining. That feeling of like, what I feel now is always going to be true is something that's easy for all of us to slip into, but is particularly easy for teens to slip into. And I really liked the idea of having something to look forward to. We actually sat down with our 16-year-old and we made a literal list. We said, let's put a list of things that you can definitely look forward to, that means something to you. And, you know, if you have to go 18 months out to find something that we know for sure will happen, fine. You know, another thing that we've taken to doing is making plans and saying, hey, you know, if we have to cancel these, we have to cancel these, but let's plan this weekend with your two friends. And then so that at least there's something to look forward to.
Absolutely. Yeah, we did some of those things in our house as well. We had wanted to go on vacation around the holidays, and we had planned it and put all of the efforts into it, etc. And then I got scared, right? And I was like, what happens if the borders shut down and we are in a different country? And what happens if, you know, people are not treating us with high respect over in those countries because they're not respecting, you know, what's happening over in the United States with how we have addressed COVID and things like that. And so ultimately we made a decision to not travel, but definitely still looking forward to what the future holds and getting excited about it. My daughter showed me pictures today of her senior picture dress outfit that she plans to wear. I was like, I don't know. We'll talk about that later, but it did give her something to look forward and to plan. It's interesting that we're talking about the mental health piece and the depression. You know, in owning Onyx Therapy Group, I'm always able to see the referrals that are coming in. And we have a major influx of teenagers seeking out therapy. And what's powerful is that it's not just the parents that are reaching out to us. Sometimes it's the teenagers that are directly reaching out to us. Like, they've gotten to a point where they're like, I need this help, and I don't know if anybody is paying attention to it. Let me reach out on my own. Of course, there's laws and ethics in terms of how we need to involve the parents, but even seeing them reach out has been beautiful. So we have specific counselors that are trained on counseling adolescents and are able to address very specific mental health needs, especially because we understand the three of us at the very least understand what's happening with the neurological implications of adolescence, right? Where we have our brain divided into these three major sections: our limbic system in the back, our amygdala in the middle, and then that frontal lobe. And understanding that adolescence is actually from ages 10 to 24, which means that the frontal lobe isn't fully developed until 24, meaning that they're not always able to use the words that they want to have. They're not able to communicate the way they want to. They're not making the decisions that they want to always make. They don't even know all of the options. And if they do know the options, they don't always utilize the options because, again, that part of their brain isn't fully developed. Where we know that most of them are still operating on their limbic system and their amygdala, meaning that they are still very sensitive to their senses, right? To these five senses. So what they see, what they hear, what they touch, and what they're seeing and hearing right now is not always positive, right? And it's sometimes triggering when you walk outside and you see people with masks on. What it indicates is you're not safe, right? And so there's all of these factors that are in place as well, which is putting them at a more higher risk of developing mental health issues. And then we think about that in addition to the normal onset age for some of these mental health issues, including personality disorders, happening in that adolescent period on top of a pandemic, right? Like it's really a lot that's being placed on them, but they don't even know how to articulate it because they don't even know what they're experiencing. They don't even know that what is normal and what is not normal and how to navigate around these particular things. So like you all mentioned, a lot of our students and children are seeking out more outside support in order to address these things because they don't want to overwhelm their parents with all of their issues, but they also know that they need hope. And that's the beauty about this generation. They are open to therapy, right? Versus our generation, which had a little bit more hesitation around it. So I wanted to bring that up because it's so important that we give them the resources that they need. And our insurances are responding accordingly. I'm seeing that a lot of them are still reducing the co-payments and co-insurance, reducing deductible amounts to really be able to address mental health overall, but the mental health of our teenagers as well.
I just want to point out that there's a difference between the tweens, the middle school age, and the older adolescents. And I think the middle schoolers are impacted much more heavily than people might realize because they don't have the social skills to have an insightful conversation with a friend through a screen. They don't have the established peer group that an older teen would have. They're not as good at identifying what's going on in their internal life. They're not as good at asking for help. They're much more likely to ask a friend for help instead of reaching out to a therapist. And by the time you're an older teen, you have that social support network established in a way that younger tweens don't have. And so for the first time, I'm seeing really happy-go-lucky kids struggle mightily. And not only are they struggling, they're just totally blindsided by the fact that they're struggling. And in fact, I would say they're suffering more because it's never happened to them before. They've never had to deal with it. They are glass half full kinds of kids. And so making sure, and also recognizing that for tweens, for those younger adolescents, they can look really light and happy and be laughing 1 second and then be really morose the next. And so adults can falsely assume they're fine. But we know half of suicide is due to impulsivity, not to depression. And so I want to urge anyone watching who has tweens in their life, who has that 9 to 14-year-old range, whether you're an educator, a parent, a clinician, to really be paying close attention and really trying to pull from those kids what's going on in their lives.
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead, Gail.
Phyllis, it's almost like, again, a lose-lose. It's like a two-sided coin, right? Because either you don't have a lot of trauma in your life and you haven't developed those resilience skills for those kids you're describing, or for the kids who have had a lot of trauma, there's a cumulative effect, right? Of just more layered on top of more, layered on top of more. So everybody is screwed, pardon my French. With the tweens, like so few kids are coming out of this unscathed, like very, very few. And the other thing is how much each of these things loops into other things, right? So the anxiety for them then loops into sleep loss, which then your amygdala, as a tween, your amygdala is already kind of off the hook and going with big emotions, but then add in sleep deprivation on top of it. And it's hopeless, right? And these things all feed into each other. And just seeing them struggle with that, and they don't forget what they want to be like, right? They don't forget how they want to act. And you can see on their faces when they do let the sleep loss and the amygdala then let them say something that is going to burn down a relationship. You can see that they're upset with themselves. And then as Phyllis said, we have this relationship churn in middle school where even in the best of times, friendships are breaking down every day as they learn how to negotiate that. It's just, I see it and it's just excruciating.
Yes,
I mean, we just need to give them a path back because I think they get so stuck when they have these blow-ups. And for kids who are learning virtually, if your friend blocks you on social media, there's no recourse. You can't just bump into them in the hall the next day. So that is just the most frustrating and, devastating experience, because there's really, talk about lack of control. These kids already have no control in their lives. And then there's nothing they can do to fix these big social hits that they might be taking. And I just feel for them. It's just so hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the major things that when we got together to write the article, we were really advocating on behalf of our teens and advocating for their mental health and their needs. And our specific population that we were looking at were policymakers, right? But now that we have this audience, and some of the people in our audience may be policymakers, and some of them may be parents, some of them may be educators, some of them may be aunties or godmothers or uncles or grandfathers, right? Let us come up with maybe a couple tips each that we can give to those folks and say, yes, we recognize that right now the policymakers are maybe not prioritizing the teens the way that we want them to, but here are a couple things that you can do at home with your teens to ensure that you are acknowledging and paying attention to their mental health, and that you are giving them space to figure out their social interactions in the midst of these stay-at-home orders. So either one of you all can start. I know we're going to be wrapping up soon, but I definitely want our audience to leave with some tips of what they can do.
I think part of the sleep deprivation that Gail was talking about is also attributable to the fact that kids are looking for some space to be alone, some time alone, so they turn into vampires so they can get a break from their parents. So one piece of advice I would give parents or caregivers is not to take it personally when kids are behind that closed door, but also not to assume that they don't want support or that they don't want you to coach them or help them. And it's the tricky thing in this age group is you have to do it in a way that's not intrusive. So just to say, hey, how are you doing? Do you need a snack? Anything I can get you? Anything you need help with? Do you have all the supplies you need for school? Nothing too personal, but just making sure you're checking in now and then. And then I also want to alleviate the guilt I know a lot of parents feel, and I can certainly relate as a parent working out of the home while my kid is at home learning virtually, to recognize that you can't win ever anyway as a parent. So one thing that struck me last week was I had a kid who was saying she was really jealous of a classmate because her mom and dad, I think they both were working at home, and she felt like this other child had all of these supports in place and people helping her and making sure her Wi-Fi was rebooted when there was a problem. And she left, and fast forward an hour or two, another student came in to tell me they were so jealous of the other student because no one was breathing down their neck all day. They weren't being micromanaged. They had more independence, more agency. So there's no getting it perfect or right anyway. The best thing we can do is just kind of bear witness to their pain, offer our support in a way that's not too invasive or too personal, and not personalize when they're acting in ways that suggest they need a little bit of more space and privacy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Phyllis. Gail, what are a couple of tips you have for the parents out here?
This is sort of another refrain on the same song as Phyllis, but I think empathy is the key. I think being able to put yourself in the shoes of the kids. And I know I talked about that a bit with the policymakers, and I wanted to say when it comes to our older teens too, there are decisions being made. Some kids aren't logging in because they're working to support their families. There's been a documented uptick in 17 and 18-year-olds taking on jobs during the day, and so looking at that and not saying, oh, this is foolish, they're throwing their education away, but looking at it as a rational choice to help your family. And then if you're a policymaker, setting up an evening course, right? Having, if you've got a big district, it should be pretty easy to find a teacher who's willing to teach in the evening to kids who are working during the day. And then when it comes to individual parents, I think that same empathy of just, as much as you can, putting yourself in their shoes, because, you might be losing work, and it seems like your problems are so much bigger. And in comparison, why are they so awful all the time? Why are they, so they don't get to see a few friends, big deal. But I think trying to reframe and trying to really take a breath, remember when you were that age, put yourself in their shoes. And then I know I already am the one who said an inappropriate word, but I'm going to say another one, because one thing I use a lot with the kids is a this sucks moment. Like as adults, we tend to go straight to the problem solving when they do share their problems with us, or the silver lining finding and being like, oh, well, you might not get to do that, but you still have this, and we've got this to look forward to. And I like to say, just give them this sucks. Like it sucks. And just give them a moment to sit in that before launching into the problem solving mode with them, which is a necessary second step, is to help them with moving on to the silver lining finding. But you really have to pause and empathize and let them know that you feel their pain for a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So some of the tips that I heard you all say were earlier around using the weather analogy, that today is a rainy day, and then we will definitely have options for sunny days soon. Making a list of things that we can look forward to, and recognizing that those things could be this week, those things could be next week, they could be in a couple months, but at least, regaining a sense of hope. Giving physical space and not taking it personally, right? Allowing them to have their own space. That may mean that they want to be in the kitchen by themselves. Just, slowly bring yourself out of the kitchen and mom, dad, go find something else that you can do at the time. Parents, alleviate your own guilt. We give birth to these children and we want to be able to protect them from everything, but this isn't something that we can protect them from. They're experiencing it alongside with us, and their experience is going to be different from ours. So it's okay if we can't fix everything in this moment. So giving ourselves some grace, having empathy for them, because again, their experiences are different than ours. I also want to encourage parents, get your children back connected to their old pastime experiences. If they were the finger painters, then get them some finger paints. If they were the ones coloring books, give them the coloring book. Even if they're 17, it's going to make them feel okay. And you're going to get down on the carpet and color with them too, because it's going to make you feel okay as well. We're big in our house around candles, and you can make candles. You don't just have to buy the candles, but making candles and putting a little bit of scent in them to increase that aromatherapy. Because remember, the children, the adolescents, limbic system, their senses are super sensitive and activated right now. So making sure you're getting them some things that they could smell good, because it's very grounding. Making sure that you guys are still trying to take some walks. So get some fresh air, even if it's cold outside. Bundle up as much as you can, even if you could only get 5 minutes outside. Get some fresh air. Get those teens to get some fresh air. If there's a friend in the neighborhood that they like, maybe they can take a brief walk together while keeping their mask on. Creating some fun social settings. So like Phyllis mentioned with the Netflix parties and things like that, encouraging them to utilize the media that they do have and think outside of the box around how they can do those things. We're planning one of my cousin's proms and thinking about how we can make it a fun prom where everybody is kind of zooming in together, but they're small groups together. So thinking about how we can be creative in those ways. Making sure that our children are still using their sleep routines. They're getting enough amount of sleep. It doesn't mean that they have to go take a warm lavender bath tonight, right? But that they are definitely having some sort of routine so that they could get enough sleep, so that they can function at their highest levels of functionality. And then making sure that we're encouraging them to identify a place of gratitude. Like Gail said, this sucks. This sucks for everyone, but at least once a day asking them what is something they're grateful for. I asked my daughter that question the other day and she said, Mom, we're still in the middle of the pandemic. Things didn't change. And I said, but what is something that you are grateful for? And it took her a few minutes, but what she said, which was so amazing to me, she said, well, in one of my classes today, I was able to realize that I'm a womanist. I'm not just a feminist, I am a womanist. And that matters to me in terms of my identity. So had she not been asked the question around gratitude, I'm not sure if she would have really thought about how much that particular school lesson, even be it virtually, has impacted her own identity. So I appreciate you all so much for engaging in this conversation with me, for spilling the tea around adolescents and teenagers and the pandemic. So Gail, why don't you tell the audience how they can get in contact with you, and then we'll follow up with Phyllis.
Yeah, sure. I have a website. Like I said, I write about education and about parenting. So there's a little something for everyone on there. I even have some humor stuff from when I was feeling overwhelmed, and usually my go-to is writing. So my website's great. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm terrible at Instagram, much to the kids' dismay. Yeah, Twitter and my website are probably the best ones.
All right. And Gail Cornwall. Gail Cornwall. All right. Thank you, Gail. And Phyllis?
I also have a website, phyllisfagel.com, but I'm probably most active on Twitter, which my handle there is @pfagel. And Middle School Matters is my book, which is also available wherever books are sold. These days, who knows?
Perfect. And for the audience, of course, you know how to reach me. Our website is onyxtherapygroup.com. We are also on Instagram @Onyx Therapy Group. And then, of course, there's my personal page, which I love to share with the world, which is Mahogany Sunshine, because I like to think that I'm full of sunshine. My kids may question that every now and then, though. But thank you so much, Gail and Phyllis, for coming in with me today, and for our audience for taking out time and listening to our perspectives, our opinions, and our actual expertise and research around what's happening with teenagers in this pandemic. Please make sure that you're paying attention to your teens and you're paying attention to yourselves as well, and understand, like Gail said, with each rainy day, there's going to be a sunny one that's going to come shortly after that. So thank you for, again, coming in with us. Make sure that you read that article that we have collaborated on. It was posted on NBC News, and watch out, because we'll probably be doing some more